feel like we're gonna be here a while.
Yeah. We don't need to clap, it's an onboard microphone. So,
Hello.
this is Ellen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Ellen Jones and I'm a campaigner and a creator with a focus on LGBTQ+ rights, mental health and disability. You can find me at youtube.com/Ellen Jones. Well, the thing is, when you're an internationally awarded campaigner...
So, I'm doing a series of videos called Media That Made Me, which is entirely stolen from Emma Popcorn. Let's call her Emma Popcorn, because that's
Everyone
how we
knows
know
her
her.
name.
So, I stole the idea from her to do, like, what things shaped you in growing as a person, because media shapes us all in different ways. So, when it comes to film, starting with that because I'm the film student that I am.
I mean, this is the biggest, like, stereotype, but probably Pride. I love a lot of media very much, but I dislike a lot of film. Of all the mediums of which to make things, film is not the one.
Mm-hmm. That's fine.
I think it's just because... Okay, hear me out. There's a lot of bad men making bad films, and like especially like the Hollywood end of film. Mm-hmm. Basically, if we were funding the films I wanted to see, I'd be into film. But they're not putting money into young queer artists making their own stuff. I'm not quite sure how I became aware of it. I might have become aware of it through Tumblr, and because there was a controversy surrounding when it got released in the States.
Okay. Because
they removed all mentions of like gays from the DVD case, and also all mentions of minors.
So they took everything that the film was about off the DVD cover.
Yeah, it was a story that was really important because what happened then went on to influence the decision to increase LGBT rights, but it had never really been covered in any media before. And also I cry so much in that entire film. Okay, the thing that I really like about it though is it's such a well-written film as well. So, a couple of elements of it.
Intermission time. This is the content they signed up for.
Yeah.
What arrived? Tupperware?
It's got chopsticks.
Oh, that's what that is.
Yeah. But yeah, you put that in.
Right. And then it doesn't close.
Then you can have like the little food. See?
Oh. So back to Pride.
Firstly, the music. I'm obsessed with soundtracks. Basically, the only thing I listen to is musicals and soundtracks. In fact, we could have done a whole thing on musicals and me. But the music is that by, I think it's called Christopher Nightingale. It's one of them where I just burst into tears at this one particular bit. I think the fact that it's about my family from Wales and like that Welsh landscapes in film generally make me cry. The fact that it's about real people that I've met since I've met quite a few of the surviving members of LGSM. It's just such a well-crafted story. So there's a couple of, it's based on a true story, but a couple of characters are fictional. So you have a character that was made up who's like a young queer kid. You opens with him stumbling upon his first Pride. He's like doesn't want to be seen as like the Pride March. And then at the end there's a bit where one of the other characters goes, I'm not too worried about being visible now, and he just goes shut up and march. And for me that's like beautiful closure. There's this like last 6 minutes of the film where you see the march and you've got one character who's one of the Welsh people who is a poet and has been bullied and has only just come out at the age of 60. Like he's walking along in the march and he suddenly sees like Gay Poet Society and like joins them, and he just smiles, and that's Bill Nye's character, and he that's that moment of recognition. There's also like one of the older women brings, who's very much like my great nana was, brings like they're all vegan bakings to like the Pride for the lesbians. There's just like so many iconic moments in that film, and it's there's a moment in it, I realise that I'm jumping around, but like there's a moment in where everything seems really dire, and the Welsh and one of the people gives a rallying talk, and then the Welsh people start singing Bread and Roses, and then the gays just cry. But there's a really interesting scene when the gays first go to, so this guy called Di Donovan comes up to London. He thought LGSM stood for like London something. Didn't know that didn't know what it stood for. Yeah. Lesbians and gays. So they raised the most money of anyone and were invited. It went down okay-ish. There's a moment in it where they're going on a walk and Di is saying, you know, that's what I think the Labour Party's all about. You support me, I support you, wherever you are, wherever you come from. And that there's a banner in the Welsh village that's like, each village has a banner and a marching band basically, and theirs has like a shaking hand. Anyway, so they're walking along, and then they can see the police cars being bussed in from around the country into this tiny village to the coal mining pit, to go to the picket. And she goes, one of the people goes, they've got a couple of guys being held in a cell at the moment for no reason. And one of the gays goes, they can't do that. And she goes, well, they're doing it. And he goes, no, they really can't do that. A police officer only has the right to detain you if he has concrete evidence that can stand up in a court, basically, that you're going to commit crime. And she goes, are you sure? And he goes, street harassment, dear, I can set it to music. And because of what he says, then she's able to go and get them out of prison because of the information that they've provided. I haven't even told you about my favourite character yet.
Okay.
Gethin, so there's Gethin, who's like a Welsh person who's like moved out of London because he's not been home but since he came out, and he has a drunk Karen conversation with Imelda Staunton. And he goes, my mum hasn't said anything to me in 10 years. And she said, and what words have you said to her? And you have this moment where Gethin goes home and sees his mum and then brings his mum later. And there's a character called Steph who's like me. She's just like, not like a little bit off the rails, but she's like an angry dyke. Excellent. And she's like, terrific, let's bring down the government. They don't want our money because we're puffs. And a dyke. She's like the only lesbian in Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners.
Okay.
So like... And then they create a splinter group for lesbians against pit closures. It's such a good film! Yeah. I don't like films, but I would watch Pride indefinitely. It's a story that resonates with me and my community. So, of course I'm gonna... And like, it's a good story. And I refuse to believe that there aren't more of them. Anyway, I feel like we should move on to the next one.
Yes, this is true. A TV show.
I wonder what TV show Ellen might adore. It's one of 2 TARDIS teapots I own.
You own 2 TARDIS teapots?
Yeah, one's at home.
That's a tongue twister. The tongue twister of 2 TARDIS teapots.
I am truly obsessed with Doctor Who. I don't necessarily always agree with the writers or the way the show goes in direction, but I'm so enamoured with it and so invested in the world that's been created and the characters, and Doctor Who also entirely motivates my activism work. I use Doctor Who as like a moral guidance. So do you want to know how I got into Doctor Who?
How did you get into Doctor Who?
When I was in year 3, I had a teacher who was also probably the first queer man I ever met, but I didn't know he was queer till much later, in hindsight. When he got married to his husband.
That'll give it away.
But anyway, he was obsessed with Doctor Who, and he introduced us to an episode called Sharda, which was written by Douglas Adams. It was partially recorded. They recorded the rest on audiobook, and then the book was novelised, and it's one of my favourite books as well. And it's a really great story. Anyway, we did all of our lessons around that, so we did like maths with monsters or like creative writing around it, and we'd use like that as a framework for our lessons. And I just got really into it from there. And then that was around the time, so the first season I watched was season 3 with Martha. Okay. And so I started with Martha. I didn't go back and watch Rose until a lot later. But I was obsessed from the off. And then obviously that was really interesting series in terms of like the political side of things with the Master coming back, and also that. So you're gonna notice I really love soundtracks and film scores and soundtracks. Yes. It's what I listen to.
Murray Gold.
All the time. And Murray Gold, but particularly I feel like season 3 is where Murray Gold peaked in terms of his writing with Doctor Who. Also season 4 to an extent, but season 3 is especially the suites like This Is Gallifrey, Our Childhood Home, is one of my favourite pieces. And I remember sobbing my eyes out when the Master refused to regenerate. I cried and cried and cried. And then, yeah, I continued watching. And I'm not sure at what point it became so significant to me, but it really did, and especially when my mental health got really bad growing up, it would be something that I would watch constantly. And also like when it came to things like the Vincent van Gogh episode,
yes,
I related to that one so much, and kind of its wisdom.
Wait,
yeah.
Do we need to just briefly pan up? Ta-da! Yeah.
So I became really obsessed with it because for me it was like a way of like keeping going. I've always kept books of like lines of things, so I keep notebooks of like lines of things that I really love. And there's so many lines from Doctor Who where I just feel them on such a deeper level. Doctor Who for me, especially from like the 9th Doctor onwards, is about a character who is essentially a suicidal mess subconsciously. The Doctor doesn't want to stay alive, and he's running around the universe, I think partially just out of distraction and out of the need to making other things better because he doesn't want to deal with his own stuff. And you see this most clearly in the special season 4, so where there's another Doctor, and there's a bit where the Doctor's reunited Jackson Lake with his son, who he didn't think he was getting back, and the doctor, he's in this building burning that's collapsing, and Jackson's like, doctor, you've got to go, and Jackson's still there, and doctor goes, you've got your son, you've got something to live for, and the Jackson Lake just goes, and you don't, and the doctor just looks at him and has no response. He's so traumatized by, especially like in New Who, like by the Time War, and by what he's had to experience and the death, and you see that in the transition from Eccleston to Tennant to Smith as he gets less and less dark. And then obviously, it became really important to me in the ideas of kindness and just helping out where you can. Like, I think that's a lot of what Doctor Who's about. It's, you know, it's a madman in a box, but it's basically about someone who can't just stand there and watch children cry. He has to get involved and help, and has to make the world a better place to live in, because he knows what it's like to live in a world that isn't. Yeah. And that is so much about what my brain is and what I do. And now obviously we've got Jodie, who I love with all my heart.
I've not seen any of her work as the Doctor.
I love her, and people have given her people have disliked her Doctor for being a mess. Thing is, she's not a mess, but she's very like not scatterbrained, but she's a little bit erratic sometimes, and she's very much like also being brilliant and doing lots of shit. And I don't know if you've looked at my bedroom. I'm brilliant, but I'm disorganised. I often forget what I'm saying a third of the way through the sentence and start 4 other conversations. But I've never seen a character like that on who's able to be all of those things. It's
interesting as well, because that would make a lot of sense as a progression of the character as a whole. If we were talking from 9 onwards, there's a sort of, how do I describe this? More comfort with chaos the further along you get.
Yeah.
I think.
And the Doctor even knows that when in Journey's End, when the Doctor gives Rose the other Doctor, the Meta-Crisis Doctor, you see he goes, that's me when we first met and you made me better. He acknowledges that he was angry and born in war, and this version of himself is very much like... And also the other thing about Doctor Who is that it should never have really succeeded. It was the first female producer at the BBC, a gay Asian director. They weren't given any of the resources that they needed, and the first time it was shown, it was flunked because Kennedy had died. None of it was ever meant to succeed. Yeah. And yet, against all of the odds, it did.
Have you seen the special that they did about the making of Doctor Who? What's it called?
An Adventure in Space and Time.
Yes.
And the music for that was done by Evan Butt, and I love it.
I love that so much. And oh god, I can never remember anyone's names, but the person who played William Hartnell, Filch. Yes. What's his name?
And then he's played the first Doctor since, but you won't have seen that.
Yeah, no.
Because he'd been in Doctor Who before as well. He was in the episode Dinosaurs on the Spaceship.
Playing basically Filch.
I went to see Russell T Davies do a talk hosted by Crystal Lee, and this kid asked, how do I write for Doctor Who? And the thing that Russell T Davies said was, watch as much as possible and write as much as possible, because at the end of the day, Doctor Who is one of those few shows where there are comedy episodes, there are drama episodes, there are episodes that are very sci-fi, there are episodes that are very that are scary episodes, like if you compare Midnight to one of the episodes with James Corden, like they're very different things, but they're all within the same show. And so
Midnight's the one with Merlin in, right? Yeah. No, I love that episode.
I was sat behind him in the theatre. Got a press invite for the thing.
She does this. She drops names at every possible opportunity.
No, I don't. Yeah, that's where Doctor Who is with me, and it's like so hugely instrumental in forming me as a person. And I think in my list of jobs that I'd love, I'd write for Doctor Who. Your battery is flashing.
Oh goodness. Intermission number 2.
I feel like it's slightly weird to be 20 and rather to rather talk about a radio show than a
video game.
Than a video game.
Yeah. So the next thing would be video games for most people, but you wanted to be special and different.
No, it's just that video games are not my jam.
Yeah, so there is no video game for you that you could really pick. So instead, we're going for a radio show.
Yes, because I am actually ancient. Yeah. My pick for radio show is called Cabin Pressure.
Tell me about Cabin Pressure. How did you discover it?
So interestingly, I think it used to be on a Thursday evening, and while we were eating dinner, it would be playing. I was never really listening to it. I found it funny, but I was never invested in it. And then Mum said to me, you know how the BBC do free recordings of things you can just go to? They were recording penultimate season, or maybe it's the last season, I was really into Sherlock and Benedict Cumberbatch is in it. We went and saw 2 episodes be recorded, Timbuktu and Escurti. It was hilarious. I've never laughed so much. You can hear my laugh on the recording because I was sat behind a microphone. And so we went to see that, and then I became obsessed from there. And it's the one thing that my family put on in the car. While Cabin Pressure is on, there's nothing that can be wrong with the world. It's a comedy show written by John Finnemore. He's one of those guys you've seen in things. And a really brilliant writer. And it basically follows an airline with one plane. So it's an air dot, because you can't put one plane in a line. And there is kind of four main characters. So you've got John Finnemore's character, who is the slightly daft, overexcited, not very clever kind of son of the owner, who's this old, kind of grumpy, bossy character played by Stephanie Cole, takes no prisoners, trying to cost cut at all times because basically the airline's in constant risk of going into debt for reasons that are revealed at the end. It all comes together beautifully, but like anyway, so then you've got Roger Allam. He plays a character who's like this old pilot, but he's only the first officer, he's not the captain, for various reasons of plot. And he is first officer to Benedict Cumberbatch's character, who's this really incompetent young pilot who's like, he's really keen and he like is constantly rule abiding. But yeah, like Roger Allam, and the reason Roger Allam flies with that Douglas Roger's character flies with them is because he had a disagreement with Air England about whether smuggling 16 kimonos in the lining of one's jacket made one a smuggler or a lovable eccentric, and so they parted ways. And then there's also a couple of characters. So there's I never remember the actress's name, but she plays various characters throughout it with different accents, but she plays the Princess of Liechtenstein, who becomes a recurring character. Anthony Head becomes Stephanie Cole's love interest as Hercules Shipwright. And there's also Burling, Mr. Burling. So there's this thing called Burling Day, which is, so all the episodes are alphabetical, A to Z, so Abu Dhabi, Boston, I could probably do them. Abu Dhabi, Boston. So we're still missing L, K and L.
K and L.
I'm gonna have to Google it, sorry, it's really gonna bug me. Kuala Lumpur.
Kuala Lumpur.
Kuala Lumpur.
Kuala Lumpur.
Yes. And that's one where they don't go to Kuala Lumpur, but they create a fake bar in a... It's hilarious, like the things that go on in this. Kuala Lumpur. And I've been really annoyed that I've missed one. Limerick. Limerick, which is when they're flying a bottle of horse jizz to Limerick from Russia. No, from Beijing. Russia, Beijing, somewhere out that way.
Yeah, somewhere in vaguely that direction. So what was the thing you think it shaped most about you then?
My entire sense of humour.
Okay, excellent. That was an easy answer.
No, the references to it. There are games they play within the flights to make it more interesting. So the travelling lemon, for example. So you take a piece of mutually agreed fuel fruit and hide it around a room, and then you can go and find it. If I say, for example, the lemon is in play, or le bear polar, to my family, like they know exactly what I mean, and like how many otters can you fit in a flight deck. There's just all these weird and wonderful references. Actually, if you haven't watched Cabin Pressure, you don't realise that I have no sense of humour myself. I'm just extrapolating from.
Just everything comes from there.
But the thing is, I think I'm like bits of each character. It's just such a well-written comedy as well. There's also so many references to things in it. There's things like Burling Day, which is... So, Burling Day is... There's a character called Mr. Burling, who's an old grumpy man who hires this plane to take him to wherever the rugby is on.
Okay.
And he bribes the staff, and they have a bottle of Talisker whiskey bought specifically for him, and Douglas always steals it off Carolyn, despite like various things that get put in place. So Burling Day is like the day that they get money, and also Douglas steals the Talisker whiskey. It was expensive, and that happens sort of every sort of one season. And then you don't really realise how emotionally invested you are in the characters. You get to the last season where you just see such development, and the last few episodes, so there's Eva Don the band where Martin goes for an interview at Air Zurich. Everything kind of comes together, and you realise how emotional you are about these characters. I don't want to spoil the plot, but there's something about the plane that is odd, and it all ends up, you know, one of the characters says, you know, there's not going to be a happy ending of this big situation that comes about. Then they fly into a sunset. So they got to Zurich, and it's going to go to Addis Ababa, so it's 2 A's. And you kind of have to envisage that they're going off in this new airline. So I have a real thing with comedy that I dislike things that are awkward, or I dislike silly humour.
Okay, well, what do you find silly?
I don't like I don't like childish humour.
Okay.
I have a very dry sense of humour and a very like particular one, and when I don't like something, I don't like it at all.
Okay.
So there's a lot of popular comedy that I just have to leave the room.
Yeah.
But it's just such a accessible, friendly show. There's weird things in it. For example, they're betting because Martin always loses bets and Douglas always wins them about which customers choose more cheesecake or strudel, which is the bet that they bet something important on in Guys and Dolls. There's lots of different references to things in it, and sometimes it's explicitly referencing something and sometimes it's implicit. So one of the characters goes, "I'll ring out wild bells in the wild sky," because she's explicitly quoting poetry. It's just good. It made me also I used to write radio comedies a lot, which is a bit weird because I feel like people think radio is a dying industry, but I love it so much. And if I could write for radio, it's the one thing that I think that I could do really well. It's my one skill. But there's other like really cute things about the show, like for example the travelling lemon became there was I think an autistic person who was really obsessed with cabin pressure, and she created a lemon that travelled the world and raised money for like
that's cool.
And then she was invited. It's got such a good fan base, and it's so pure and so wholesome. If you listen to the extra with David Tyler, you can find out all the weird and wonderful things about it. But it's just so good.
Anyway, now let's get on to the next thing, because we've been on cabin pressure for a long time. I feel like there's probably a lot more to say.
Oh yeah.
But the next thing, oh god, we've already been going for 52 minutes. Fuck. Let's do book fairly quickly.
You'd think, given how much I read, that I would have got this one like down.
There are a lot of books there. I mean, I guess that makes it more difficult.
Yeah, it really does. I disagree with a lot of her politics now, but when I read Caitlin Moran's How to Be a Woman, it was the first time that I saw someone writing like me and being praised for it. I write in a way that's very... I mean, you know this about me. I don't have qualms about divulging very personal things about myself, and also being sweary and just unladylike. And as I said, I disagree with her politics now, but in terms of writing style and in terms of her approach to writing, that influenced me massively, and it influenced like even down to like clothes. So I really like idolized her. I needed someone to give me permission to write about things that I wanted to write about. A lot of the stuff I talk about is quite taboo in some circles still. There's a lot of people who want to make my work less, or like they want to make it less radical or more like in line or conforming, and I'm not very good at that. It was kind of one of the first books about feminism that was published popularly to great acclaim. And as I said, like I don't know the story behind this, so what's the politics that you disagree with now? She's just said some stuff as a person that like not about like things like not giving a fuck about POC. There's just like some dodgy politics in there. When I started reading her, I was year 7. That was a long time ago, so, and I think I probably did really look up to her, and as I've learnt more about her politics and more about intersectionality, and I don't, a lot of people are like, she's trash. I think she's got some stuff she needs to address that she just doesn't, and that frustrates me. Writing style, hugely influential on my work. Politics, no. Or at least politics now, no. Okay. If that makes sense. It was an introduction into this world of like feminism that I don't think... The thing is, like, I can be critical of things that were influential on me, whilst also acknowledging that if I hadn't had that book, I would never have known what feminism was for many years. I was really kind of, for my age, like being 10 and 11, ahead of the feminist curve, if that makes sense, compared to my peers, and it meant that I was then engaging in discussions around like political stuff. I really looked up to her in the sense of like, she's messy, she does a rather than a big and weird, and she was loud, and I saw her speak. I actually copied how she spoke, and like so I learned to speak. I learned to speak by copying different people. So Caitlin Moran, Gregory Duran, a few other people. Like I just copied them, and she gave me something to model myself on when I was still trying to find my feet in who I was. It's really interesting. I want to ask more questions, but I know that we've spent a long time on the first one, so I'm going to move on to the next and final thing, which is a social media person. I don't know if she counts as a social media person, but my mate Natasha Devon, who is a mental health campaigner. Okay. So the fun story about this is that she came into my school in 2015, I think. So she's from my old school. Okay. And then she came back as a speaker to talk about mental health, and I was like, you're really cool. And I don't know how, but I think I stalked her into being my friend. I just really have always supported her work, and I love the way she speaks. I adore the way she writes. And I think also we're very similar, and I'd never seen people being successful, changing the world, and doing it in a way that I really wanted to see happen. She's such a kind human being, because you know sometimes like people are different how they are in public to real life. She's such like, she's so herself, and like seeing someone who is like so their self all the time, and who is also interesting seeing how like more political she's gotten since over time, and I just really admire all of her work and the things she does.
More political in what sense?
When I first met her or was aware of her, she was sort of a columnist. Okay. And then she was the government's before it went tits up, she was the government's advisor for mental health.
I mean, when
they kicked her out and were planning they had a conspiracy plot to get rid of her like the thick of it, and she got a dossier of information using an FOI to find out what they've been saying, and basically she was telling them they were fucking up young people's mental health.
Who was the they in this?
The government.
Okay, the government in which year?
She got given the position 2015.
Okay, so this was...
No, 2016, basically like...
So this was post-coalition?
Yeah, post-coalition. Yeah, okay. But yeah, they couldn't get rid of it. Basically, but I just really...
Doesn't even get started on politics.
I just really admire her, and she's very much like been a big support of my work, and I of hers, and... Okay, you know when you just see someone and you're like, you're cool. Although I still haven't listened to David Bowie. She's obsessed with Bowie. Okay, I was going to say, I presume this is a she's never watched Doctor Who, and I've never listened to Bowie, and I feel like we're going to have a weekend one day where we just like mutually sort things out. I think it's cool to see, it sounds really weird, but to see like queer women adults, who, because she came out recently as well, who are being cool and political and speaking and writing and just being themselves and thriving. I don't know, I think there's something I find really comforting about seeing people who I think it would be cool to be like when I'm older, because I think also like as like someone who's got a very weird career going on at the moment, if you can call it that, activist role model is really important to me. And also as like a young queer person and as a young person who's got this activist like side, and also being in 2019 as we are, I don't have a trajectory for what my life's going to look like. And so seeing people who are being badass and cool is just really important to me. And that sounds, I don't know, it sounds silly, but like...
No, that makes sense.
It's when you see someone doing something and then you think, hey wait, I could do that too.
Yeah. And
I think it's interesting because she works kind of in mental health, so she had an eating disorder and now has an anxiety disorder, and she runs like serious campaigns on like they've got to go to parliament and things. I only kind of got into mental health stuff later. I was very heavily in the LGBT stuff, and the mental health stuff come later. She started doing LGBT stuff but has always done mental health, so we kind of like have similar sort of like similar areas, and sometimes she comes and asks me things about LGBT stuff, but like, and I ask her about mental health, and she has really good eyebrows. I always thought that you couldn't be glamorous and be taken seriously. And
okay, that's like, really interesting.
I don't know, she's like really tall and like cool hair, and she like dyes her hair a lot, and I don't know, she's badass, and I wanna be like that. Oh, also like side note, she also introduced me to so many of my current friends, like the people I've been texting. There are people that I've met through her at her book launch. I'll meet someone I met.
Oh, what was the book?
Beginner's Guide to Being Mental.
Okay.
An A to Z, from anxiety to zero fucks given. I went to a book launch, and now because of that I've befriended like Hope Virgo, Claire Easton, Ruth Cooper Dixon, who are now some of my close friends. She's just basically great. She's just like kind of like me in a similar area but older and more experienced. Yeah. And I'm like, cool! Yeah. I've never seen people like me before. I've finished my beer now. We've answered the questions. We've answered all the questions. Are there any final thoughts? Subscribe to my newsletter and my YouTube channel. Follow me, Ellen__Jones. I make content about LGBTQ+ stuff, mental health, disability, making things, studying brain stuff, all of the above, gay stuff. I know you're on a straight person's channel. God,
I know. What are you doing here?
I know. The questions people had for you were hilarious.
Okay, I'm excited to see this. Oh, and if you subscribe to Ellen, you might see me on
if we actually get around to filming.
If we actually get around to filming it, answering some questions.
From the gays.
We could do that. That would only take half an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the end of the video.
Should we do that now, or do we do the pasta?
Let's do that now, and then do the pasta, and then...
Can we just use your camera and swap the SD?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to suggest. That's a good video. Endings, something, blah.